Let me introduce the speakers and the moderator of our panel. So today we have with us Andria Zafirakou, who is a Global Teacher Prize winner and CEO of Artists in Residence, Art Textiles teacher, and also senior leadership team at Alperton Community School in London. Also, we have Koen Timmers with us, who is a Belgian researcher, lecturer to university, and author of the books. And Kim Ox, international education consultant and online education designer. And the panel will be moderated by Marina Goncharenko, co-founder of Impact Hub Odessa and founder of Education Transformation Lab. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us, and I pass the floor to Marina.
Thank you, Dennis. Welcome everybody to our session, Giant Leap to Schools Online, Emergence to a New Normal. Today we are going to touch upon a very acute topic because, as we all know, COVID-19 forced a unique experiment to the global education system. Within a couple of weeks, we all had to go online, from kindergartens to universities, and it has been a really unique experience. I wanted to use a stronger word, but I would say it has been a complicated experience for all the participants of this process, starting from kids, parents, educators, teachers, administrators, so it's concerned everyone. And the aim of our today's session is to reflect on this experience, and we are going to do that with the help of our wonderful experts, and we have already been introduced, and I would just like to add that we have now here in this session the whole variety of experiences, starting from school education to adult education and online education, and also geographically. We have the perspective from Belgium, from the UK, from Germany, and through myself from Ukraine. So hopefully it's going to be very educational and interesting. I would like to start with some personal input from our panelists. The first part will be, I would ask you to share a little bit about your work, because I know about the wonderful project that you do, and not everybody who is with us here does that. And the crucial question here is, how was your work affected by the pandemic and by the lockdown that followed the pandemic? And I planned it that the first person to start sharing would be Koen, because as you are a computer science teacher by background, I assume that this process might have gone easier for you than for like other, the rest of us, or not. What would you say?
Exactly. I guess it went easier. So a little bit of background or context. I'm teaching in 2 different Belgian schools. One of those is adult education, in which I teach web design. And we teach in a very specific situation in which our students come to school for half of the time. So they have the social interaction, etc. And the other half, they remain at home, in which way we offer them education using video conferencing tools. So we have been doing this already for like 12 years, had a lot of expertise, but the main difference this time is that this time everybody had to do it because we only did it in our department, web design department, and we were not really able to train the teachers and the students up front, which is crucial. I'm also head of distance learning in our school. And so I had to make sure that every teacher was on board of the online teaching. And we have like department of cooking, gardening, craft. And what we noticed is that every subject really requires a very different approach, which may be the difference between synchronous and asynchronous learning, etc., etc. In our country, the government made a deal with the organization to make sure that they collected and refurbished laptops. So they collected about 20,000 laptops, which went to children in need who don't have a laptop. And our main internet provider, they're offering free access to internet. Now, these are really good initiatives, but in the end, we noticed that we still have a lot of children without internet connection and laptops. And apart from teaching at the school, I also launched several global educational projects. In one of those, we have been teaching refugees in a refugee camp for 5 years, including sending laptops. And we noticed that there is really interesting technology available for those who don't have internet connection. And we also have been connecting students across the world, like 100,000 students in 100 countries. And for those who want to be part of those projects, they can surf to earthproject.org. And I will mention some of those projects during this discussion as well.
Great. Now, then I wanted to ask Andrea, as I know that you are a teacher of arts and textiles, and at the same time, you're on the leadership at your school. So again, that must have been a challenge to go online with all of your work, or how was it?
Very similar to what Koen said. We had, I think, 48 hours actually before we had to transfer everything. I think our government wanted to hold the teachers in the schools as long as he possibly could, for whatever reason that was. So we had less time to quickly adapt. And the one thing that we found very quickly was the fact that there was so much inequity, which again is what Koen touched on. Inequity in terms of our young people, what resources they've got at home, how to train, how to teach them, but also for staff. So we were a Google school. We've been using Google Classrooms for years and years and years. But again, not every department prefers that way. Not every teacher prefers that way to teach. And again, for students to access. So it has been extraordinarily challenging. And one of the things which we have naturally had to do is consider our pedagogy. So as a teacher, I've had to consider how I teach, because the way that I would have access to all my resources in my classroom, the way that I would be able to instantly, almost magically sense whether or not I need to intervene and help a student, the feedback which you give naturally when you're in the classroom environment, that now has got to change. And so my instructions and the pace of my lessons, and also how fun they are, you know, because again, many young people are staring at the screen for 5 hours a day, and some people, and you know, what you've really got to make sure that you're teaching something which is engaging, which is motivating, and which as a teacher you enjoy planning. And you know, reflecting on what I've learned and what I've done, I mean, it's been a huge challenge for me, and I really don't like it. I really don't like teaching this way. I really don't like teaching through a computer screen. I know many of my colleagues now have thought this is a brilliant way forward, but I think for the arts and the creative teachers, I think it's part, you know, we know that we need to be there for the journey until the end product of the students' work. And so I think that's what's missing. I miss the relationships that we have when we're in the classroom with our young people and our learners. I miss the laughter, the talks, just the banter. I miss them, you know, walking past our classrooms, checking in, you know, having a look to see, oh, hi miss, good morning, and walking back. So just that kind of that acknowledgement that you're there, that makes them feel safe, that makes them feel that everything's okay. And I think I really miss that, and I know they do too. I've noticed also in terms of motivation and engagement, you know, at the beginning, I think everyone was quite excited, right? You know, I'm learning online, but I think now, you know, as the teenagers, there's a dip, isn't there? There's some of them have now switched off. I know that I've spent many hours calling them at home to say, come on, log on, get on. And the worst thing is that you have a parent who's sleeping as well. So the parent's sleeping, the child's sleeping. So again, that motivation, who's there to support that child to get motivated? Obviously, mental health and personal well-being has been a huge factor, and it just shows you how incredible schools are, and the walls of the school and the institution, and how, you know, for those hours, you know, we do keep our children safe and sane. But in terms of my role as a leader, I have got so many more grey hairs and white hairs. I don't know if you can see there. I think now more than ever we really need to kind of praise and thanks and, you know, say well done to our leadership teams in schools, because, you know, they've managed to really transform their communities and really trying to get engaged with them and look after the well-being of their staff and look after the well-being of their young people and feed them, you know. So it's been so complex, and you know, I just say the thank you at this moment in time for what you're doing, and, you know, for taking true leadership when we needed it.
Great, thank you, Andrea. I've noted a couple of things in what you have just said that I would like to go back later, because the point on reviewing or reconsidering the pedagogy is extremely important, I think, and I see that we already have some questions related to that in the chat, so we will surely touch upon that later. And now over to Kim. Who, as I know, has been quite successful in working online with adult education. So how do you see your work changed in these new circumstances? Or again, well, actually, that's an interesting point, because I thought before that you will share much more like changes that happened in your work, but so far we see that you've been quite experiencing in working online. So Kim, what do you say?
So for me personally, my giant leap to online education happened back in 2011 when I started teaching online graduate courses in education, and then moved on to help launch and lead an online doctoral program in educational leadership. So for almost a decade, my role was to teach teachers and non-formal educators. Mm-hmm. And so for us, online education meant they could stay in their classrooms in Ethiopia or Estonia and apply what they learned about educational theory and pedagogy directly to their work with their students. And online education meant educational leaders in Canada, Jamaica, and Jordan stayed in their offices or their NGOs or refugee camps and could apply what they learned about leadership and people management and entrepreneurship to their work. But also at the same time, they had really rich exchanges with their classmates in this global classroom. And so we had like teachers in New Jersey and Zimbabwe who realized that, perhaps to their surprise, they had common problems. And as online graduate students, they researched the problems that they were living with every day and understood them better. And so for us as university administrators, these students taught us what they through online education, what their students, their schools and learning organizations needed to become empowered. And they also taught us as faculty what our role needed to be as online instructional faculty, what content to teach in our curriculum and how to teach them. So that was my lesson before COVID, that online education means co-creating education. And I think the future is going to be more, as we go to this new normal, is more co-creative and collaborative. But since COVID, I'd say my work as a consultant and researcher has changed drastically. And I'd say there are two main lessons. The first one was that partnerships, not platforms, are going to determine what's possible in education. So at one point in the crisis, we had 191 countrywide closures and 1.5 billion students out of school. And so we talked about this force into emergency remote teaching and this focus on continuing instructional delivery. But the distance learning and the learning platforms looked really different across the globe. So in countries like Bulgaria and Croatia, or even Rwanda, you had educational programming that went on TV. But as Andrea was saying, like not everyone has access to that case to TV. There were well-sourced resources that were schools that were moving their teaching online, but not every, as Kuhn was pointing out, not every child can have access to a reliable internet connection or internet-enabled device with the right software, or as Andrea said, the protected space to do the work at home. So we couldn't assume that these teachers also had the time or the skills to use the new technologies. And we heard really interesting stories of children having to navigate 10 apps for their 10 different subject teachers, and spending more time struggling with the apps and learning the content and needing the parents there next to them to supervise what's going on. And so with homeschooling on the rise in Germany and Netherlands, which was forced, reluctant homeschooling, I should say, schools and teachers really relied on email, with teachers sending out videos explaining what specific tasks to do, and also used snail mail and sent out packets of assignments because they found that was the most effective way to get people access. And so we also saw phone school with teachers delivering assignments over mobile phones and messaging apps. And so there are many, many possible platforms, but I think that the real key point here is what makes it different is the partnerships behind them. And I think when Kuhn was talking about the, having these tech companies partnering to provide certain devices, or in Rwanda, there was an interesting story of a teacher who had really good internet access at home, downloading files from an online platform that provided curricula, and she partnered with the local business who could print the materials to distribute it to the children. And we saw nonprofits partner with schools to provide missing school meals. Technology companies, as Kuna mentioned, also stepped up and offered discounted or free internet. So I think when we're debating these online platforms, and there's been a lot of conversation about it, and which technologies are useful, we really also need to be talking about platforms for partnerships and collaboration. And during this emergency, we also saw how formal and informal education worked in parallel, and how might this continue. We also saw, the shift, which I think was an important shift in a conversation about how do we replace teachers with technology to how do we empower teachers with technology. And I think that was a really important shift that happened. And hopefully we can continue to have discussions around new partnerships that are needed for training the teacher of the future. And we also sort of, Andrea was saying too, when the absence of schools, we finally acknowledged all the services a school provides in a community. And so we think about that, sort of understanding what businesses, schools, technology companies, publishers, how they can all work together, and also what new platforms need to exist so we can help them find each other as well. And I'd say the second lesson for me was that out of COVID and how it changed was individualized learning is not an individual endeavor at all. And so digital technologies have made it very easy for us to develop curricula and learning materials to cater to different learning styles. But this idea of learner-centric learning, which has been a huge advantage of online education, but we learned through COVID that that's not just the curriculum, and that's part of the education ecosystem. But we learned that the role of the teacher, the parent, is essential in facilitating the transmission of knowledge and confirming understanding. We saw that context is crucial. So issues related to access, economics, health, mental health, environment directly impact education. So I think when we're looking towards a new normal, we need to remember that this individualized learning is not an individual endeavor. So for me, the three lessons before and after COVID were partnerships, not platforms, will determine what's possible. Second is individual learning is not an individual endeavor. And the third is that online education is really co-created and a very collaborative experience.
Great, thank you. Thank you for such a comprehensive input. You actually predicted some of my next questions, because as a next step, I wanted to shift from individual perspective more to broader picture, more to look at the systems and how they reacted to what has happened. For example, how this shift online was evaluated by kids, teachers, and parents. For example, in Ukraine, we have some figures from State Service of Education Quality of Ukraine, which said that top 3 difficulties that school students had is the lack in communication with the teacher, the live communication, the difficulty in actually mastering the material, being online, and the difficulties in with schedules, that it was really difficult to keep up to the schedule while school teaching online. Teachers said that their three top difficulties were that they had to spend more time for preparation to lessons, that not all the kids, like 46% of the teachers said that, 72 said that kids were always not there, not online. They lost connection with the kids, and largely because in 73% of cases, the kids just didn't have gadgets. And according to parents, parents said that it was difficult to motivate kids to study online. And also there was, in many families, there was this competitions for the only gadget that they had in the family, and they had to either compete or buy another device for the family. Generally, we have only 25% of parents who are happy, who are content with what have been going on. And there's even the move in our country, there's a petition that has already collected a lot of voices to ban online distance education as such in the country, because it seems like it has been a very traumatizing experience for many families. So what, Kim, you have already provided us some data on that, but maybe you have some additional comment on what the public reaction to this process was in Germany.
Mixed, very mixed. So I think there were a couple issues. I mean, one was a big concern about access and a big concern about the lack of training given to teachers. And there was also a big issue around privacy, a huge discussion about what were people allowing into their homes suddenly. So a really concrete example was there was a big burst about Zoom, and sort of use Zoom as a way to facilitate. And there were sort of two comments. One is this hidden curriculum of Zoom, which was there were teachers who knew how to use Zoom really well and very effectively. And there were other teachers that had no idea how to use it. Then back, this was at the beginning of COVID, there was the Zoom bombing impact. And so people were saying, no, you have to stop using Zoom, don't use Skype, switch to text messaging. And there were people who basically said, but it works, so we have to keep using it. So I think there was the public reaction, which was focused on privacy, but then there's the real practical reaction of how do we get this done? And your point about devices and access, I think that was very common, and the responsibility put on parents. And that was underestimated in terms of the amount of time that it would take. And just in general, I mean, so in Germany in particular, homeschooling is really not allowed. It's constitutionally. So this idea that it was necessary and it was safe, but there's a very strict observance in Germany about roles. And it was very clear that this is the role of the teacher. The role of the parent is not the role of the teacher. So the role of the parent or the teacher is to facilitate content, deliver content, and teach the content. But the parent's role is to support, to provide, to be, the social development support. But that was very clear. And I think in other countries, it was very confused. And when I talk to people who, in other countries where the teacher just stepped back completely, and the parents were like given basically, here's a list of resources, good luck to you. That was not. So I think still now the conversation is, how do we involve teachers? How do we involve parents? And it's seen as we're going to still maintain these different roles, but training the teachers very differently.
Thank you. That's what you say is actually very similar to what has been happening in Ukraine, especially about the list of resources and good luck with it. So it has been a very common pattern here in many, unfortunately. Now, Andrea, what is the situation in the UK? I know that UK has been like a little bit later than many of the European countries to step into this lockdown situation.
Well, it's really fascinating, because although we're probably a couple of miles away or hours away in terms of an aeroplane, it's, the attitude of the teachers and what's expected from the teachers is still quite high over here. I mean, we are working full out, we're working a normal timetable. We're having to do the phone calls home to make sure that every child is online and is available. So there's still an incredible amount of work expectation from us. And still, you know, it's the teacher's responsibility to make sure that the students are making progress. What has been really supportive though is the fact that parents we've got teachers who are working from home, they've got children in the background, and so we parents know now how valuable and how much input the teacher has had on those young people. But it has been really, really different to what the model which Kim just said in terms of Germany, that, you know, it's been very, very strange. It's been very strange. But the one thing that I have had asked me is, you know, how can I help my child even more? What else can I do? Because again, when you're setting work for young people, you know, sometimes they may spend 2 hours on a piece of work, sometimes they may spend half an hour on a piece of work. So again, the quality of the work, it varies. And so there's always been, what else can I do? What else? So parents have been feeling kind of a huge sense of responsibility and guilt to make sure their child is not losing that progress and has still got those skills which they need to when they go back eventually into their main buildings.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Koen, do you have anything to add from Belgium perspective?
Mm-hmm. I think that people were not prepared to this, and so it became a school effort. Government didn't really claim how this had to happen. This way of learning, we shifted to pre-teaching, so teachers were not allowed to bring on new content, and now went back to school for 3 weeks. They are now rehearsing that amount of knowledge. I'm really at the same line as Kim when she mentioned that teachers need to be trained. So I would say, like, between this first wave and potentially second and third wave of COVID, we really need to make sure that there is a good flow which works for every school, so that teachers know how to do this. Because what teachers did is, there has been a huge discussion about what's the best way to teach, you know, what is education, and a huge amount of research which went on instruction is not the best way to go, and others claiming like it is the best way to go. But now when we shifted to technology, all of a sudden everybody is instructing for 99% of the time. While I'm really convinced that there are other ways to use technology, also making learning more collaborative, but also, and in essence, I would say, like, this is really important to know, like, blended learning is a good model to start with, and blended learning is different for everybody. But for us, it's like the acts of individual and learning in a group, online and in a classroom, and also synchronous and asynchronous. So when one family only has like one laptop, synchronous learning doesn't make any sense, because 2 kids may have to use the same laptop. Then you have to shift to asynchronous learning, in which the teacher creates a video lesson, and maybe the teacher can be like 3 hours online, so students can come online to the virtual classroom and are being guided, and their answers are being answered, their questions are being answered, and they are being guided personally. So I think that this was the first stage in which everybody tried to offer, like, try to use Zoom and those kind of tools. But I think we need to shift to a more hybrid kind of learning, in which we are, as teachers, become really creative in combining all of those technologies, and which is most important is realizing that pedagogy is really key in this process as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And you mentioned between the second and third wave of COVID. So my next question would be actually about the future. So what happens next when the new academic year starts? Like in Ukraine, it starts in September. I know that in some countries it starts in August. Do you think that, what do you think happens at schools? Do we get back to normal? Or do we use blended forms, or what do you feel you need to prepare for as a teacher, as an educator, for the new educational season, so to say? Now, it's up to you who wants to be the first. Okay, Andrea.
I'd love to come in now, because I'm working quite a lot behind the scenes, preparing the transition from the younger children who are now moving up to high school. So that kind of year 6 to year 7 transition. What schools need to be doing now is really thinking about, and I know it's a very kind of cliche word, but it's the mental health. It's making sure that the young people are okay, that teachers are okay, that they understand how they're feeling, understand what they need to do to support them, to understand that actually having a bad day is okay. So a lot of investment in terms of the character building, in terms of looking at making our young people a bit more, I don't like the word resilient, but you know, stronger, I'd say, in order for them to kind of feel great about going into the environment. What we also need is good guidance from our governments, you know, good guidance that says, this is what will happen, this is what we'd like you to do. Support is invaluable now, and decisions need to be made and kept as much as possible. At the moment, I feel that I'm juggling three hats. I've got a plan A for September, I've got a plan B for September, I've also got a plan C for September. So it's the more information we can do that have, the better it is. But I think those two key things are something. And one other thing, if I just can really be naughty and squeeze this in, is to think about assessment, because we've had many cohorts of young people who have had that huge big anticlimax. So, you know, they've been preparing for their examinations, they've been building their lives up to get these qualifications, their GCSEs, whatever, and it's just gone down. And so there's an anxiety of the students who have been working online. You know, what would be the assessment? What would be the assessment for next year? What would be the assessment for their exams? You know, would they have an extension? So getting these questions and answers really looked at quickly, not thought, but get it done now so that we know. I think that would be really valuable for us in our schools.
Thank you. Thank you. Kim, Kon, do you have anything to add? Do you have your idea of how your work would look like in September?
Yeah, so in Belgium yesterday, they made a decision that every child in primary education will go to school anyway, even in case there is a second or a third wave, which is different than secondary education. But I think that it's really important to know that every age and every subject requires a different approach. So I'm perfectly fine with instructing my topic online, but I don't think it makes sense in Andria's case, and people need to be together. So I think we need to shift like this more blended hybrid model in which students may have to remain at home for one day or something like that. But it's really important to realize that every topic and every subject may require a different approach. And also it's really important that education is not only about offering and delivering content. It's also about, my son is 9 and he really wants to see his teacher, you know. He really needs that time spending with her and having a conversation with her. So not speaking about math or science, but just seeing her, and that is
social interaction.
Yeah, that's a real important part of the kids' well-being, basically. Yeah.
Kim, do you have a comment on that, or?
I just have something to add. So in Germany, there's a point that Andrea brought up about government, and I should have said this from the beginning, that Germany operates on a federal system. So every state is really its own education system. And so I think that's important too, is to look at how it's designed. But in Germany, some states have actually already sent their kids back this year before the summer break. And it was interesting to see what happened. One was this focus on social distancing and trying to figure out how do you do social distancing in a classroom. And what was really interesting to learn was that, you know, they staged it. So it's, they focus, as Andrea brought up, assessment. So the people who were closest to exams, they were the first ones to go back. And then, you know, number of days that they attended, to Koen's point, it was very staggered. But there were a lot of challenges in terms of, you know, trying to do these things where they're going up one staircase, down the other staircase, washing hands here. There's parents are giving very strict rules. And then when they all come out, they're together. I mean, their kids don't naturally socially distance. So I think what Koen talked about was this blended model, and how do you come up with some subjects being very different. And I think that that's what is being learned now, even in this very brief period of time of a week when they tried it to sort of learn lessons. And it sounds like we're in a period of the summer of reflection. And then some decisions will be made about how people plan their days. But I relate to both those situations of not quite knowing yet. We're in a weird period.
Thanks. I actually see that in the Q&A session, we have quite some questions already, and some of them are really interesting. So my last questions before we go into Q&A would be about structural change, and whether you think that this situation that we are having now and the possible second or third wave of COVID will actually disrupt the educational landscape as we know it and lead to some really serious systemic changes. Like one of the versions that I've read recently in some publications with some experts, it says that we might end up in the situation with the mass education as we know it will only be online, while offline education we think of as traditional, as recognized, will actually be available to only very privileged, small number of very privileged people. So what do you think about that? In short, will there be any really serious structural changes?
That's an interesting one. May I?
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure that technology will become available, like internet. I'm pretty sure about that, like what Musk is doing. But we may be in a case somewhere in the near future where everybody has technology, but I'm really sure that that doesn't really mean that everybody is going to use technology to offer education. There's an example of McDonald's. They're completely able to make everything to serve customers with technology. And they did that in one certain state in the US. But people want to be served by a human being, you know, and so they turn that decision back without using the technology. So I'm really sure that we will not become, we will never be in that place in where teachers will be replaced by technology, as Kim already stated. We just need to make sure that we will use it in a clever way. Yeah.
Great. Andrea, you wanted also to comment on that. I saw your reaction. It was very emotional.
God, I really hope that's not how it's going to be. I really hope that, and actually I have got hope because, you know, I attended a meeting yesterday and I was presenting to many policymakers and ministers of education all over the world, and we were talking about assessment. And it was quite inspiring to hear that the assessment, the way that they're thinking about assessment is not about having everything at the end of the year, that there's going to be an ongoing formative assessment and maybe have a portfolio. And this is really exciting time. So I have got hope. The other, just to add on to what Koen said, I think what's really important is that, yes, we've got this amazing children and young people, humans like to socialize. That's our thing. But again, and going back to what Kim said and what great practice it has been in Germany, is that every community is different. My school is very different. My students in my school are very different. The school 2 miles down the road from me is very different. That ethos, that culture is different. So I think really giving that trust and emphasis on school leaders to do what is best for their community could be a way forward. But again, that takes a lot of trust. And if governments are questioning themselves, why do I not trust them, my leaders, to lead my schools? And again, that's something to self-reflect on as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Kim, would you like to say a couple of words on that, or will we pass on to Q&A?
I'll just add a couple of things. There's some interesting case studies to look at in the United States. There's in particular 3 organizations, K-12, Connections Academy, and Florida Virtual Schools, where it is entirely possible, in theory, for someone to start their online education at the age of 5 and end it at 18. And so it's mass online education. It's using a standardized curriculum, but what they have found is it's impossible. So there's schoolhouses, there's community schooling, there's something complementing it. A former student of mine, to Andrea's point with the arts, they have come up with this blended arts academy. It is impossible to teach art online entirely. And so they have these, you know, these schools. So I think it's about looking at models that have been out there. Also, there's a lot of interesting work in India and other countries where they've had, you know, they've started because of a long tradition of community types of schools or different ways of training teachers. But I think rethinking, one is the role of the parents in all of this. Once you get to these more time online, as we learned, what these community schools look like in their role. And two, I think is really rethinking, and this is it's a bold thing to do, but rethinking age-based learning, and also the number of years that, and some of the standards that we have in terms of teachers working with a child 1 year, as opposed to multiple years where they can really observe a child's development to the point of mental health and other things. I think there's some interesting models to look at and to research, but the answers are yet unknown.
Yeah, I think there is very little that we know for sure right now. And I can see that there is a whole pile of questions, and our host gives me a sign that we actually have still 10 minutes for the questions. So question number 1 in rating here is 5 advice on how to make online education effective. So what works and what doesn't? What are the like 5 top tools to make online education effective? Koen, you're our expert in online.
I think you have to make those clever combinations of like synchronous and asynchronous, because both have their benefits and drawbacks. Like when you teach online synchronous with Zoom or Teams, it actually depends on the topic you're teaching, because like we had teachers who were teaching languages using Google Meet, and the audio seemed not to be perfect for that. So they had to shift to Zoom as well. It's really important to make sure that students are activated, that you check whether they understand. It's important to know that it takes more time for a teacher. When you teach online, like teaching some subject may take like 1 hour, what takes like half an hour in your classroom. I also think that it's also part of the mindset. When you think it's not going to work for me, it will not work. You have to try to go to a growth mindset in order to teach with the technology. And I think in the next stage, teachers really have to try how to shift to more like collaborative learning using technology, because you can do that. And you have to realize that not every part of your class or your lesson can be replaced by online teaching as well.
Yeah. Kim, what are the 5 top 10 tools from your perspective?
I mean, I think I wouldn't add much. The one thing I would add is be very clear about the goals when you're designing the goals of the program or the goals of that. And that is, to Koen's point, the technologies that you choose, the approach that you take, it really needs to be goal driven. And I think often we're trying to just take something and push it online and think there's an automatic bridge if you have an offline to put it online, when the goals were actually very different. So that's where that's the one point I would add, is think about the goals.
Mm-hmm. Now, among the questions, we have 2 questions that are actually interrelated, and they're about education becoming more globally universal and recognized. So one question sounds like this: minding the recent changes in the educational sphere, can we presume that the online obtained diploma will become more recognized around the world? And the second question, which I think is pretty much related, is specifically to Kim. Do you think that online learning will bring students closer to being global citizens? So how, what do you think about that? Kim, yeah.
I think with the first one, in terms of the diploma, the answer is absolutely yes. And you see this in the offerings. So 10 years ago, it was pretty controversial, but now what you see is Coursera, which is one of these MOOCs where universities offer. You see this interesting phenomenon where you can, there are multiple universities that do this. They offer their traditional university diploma, on campus. They offer a second version at a highly discounted rate online on Coursera, and sometimes even a third version, which is a certificate program. And they make no distinction at the end of the day of the certificate if it was online or offline. So to me, that speaks volumes in terms of the market has accepted that they're interchangeable. I think, however, having said that, the educational experience you will get will be entirely different. So the value or what it means to you will be different if it's online versus in person, but it's accepted. And in terms of becoming closer to global citizens, I optimistically think yes. I mean, that's been my experience in higher education and adult education. But I think it depends on, as both Koen and Andrea said, it depends on the pedagogy that you use, how effective the teaching is, the curriculum that is developed. And as Koen was pointing out, this ability now to co-create and collaborate so that when I literally in teaching online, and this happened last year, I teach at a university, you have students who are literally coming across 3 different continents, bringing their ideas together and exchanging ideas, exchanging photos and videos. It's a very new, very powerful experience where new connections can be fostered. So yes.
Andrea?
Oh, I really hope so. I really hope that there is, the world is so much smaller now, isn't it? And it's wonderful. We can Zoom at 8 o'clock at night, and we can connect with people from Singapore. Yeah. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. We love this. I'm really excited about the new ideas and the new way forwards, and how COVID will bring us together ultimately. I'm excited about the fact that now's a good time to reset and just kind of rethink about how do we want things to be from now on, and to use this opportunity as a great time for change and to kind of rethink what we want the futures of our world to be like, and that's what schools should be using to kind of drive their young people forward.
Thanks. Another question that I have here is about teacher training. And it says, in your opinion, how is it best to retrain the older generation of teachers to correctly use like online e-tools for education?
It's really interesting, because I found that the teachers that were the most experienced in my school, the older teachers, they've been the first ones to get excited and really go, right, okay, how do I use online learning? And they've been the first people to really grasp at it, and they're flying. they're absolutely flying. And I think there's been kind of like a lease of life and an inspiration in their pedagogy. I know this is like it may not be the case for everyone, but let's remember, our young people, they like learning. Most of them like learning this way, and they like devices, and they like they can navigate software and platforms quite easily. So I think we have got to change our mindsets, which what Koen said earlier, that this is something that we need to now embrace in all teacher practice.
Yeah, and it's not only about the age of the teachers. It's mostly about computer literacy and the readiness to use these tools. Kim, yeah.
I'd add one other
thing.
Sorry, I'd add one other point on that, which is in higher education, online higher education, you see this already, that there are these new roles. So you have the curriculum designer, which is different from the person who's actually teaching. And so I could see a situation where you have people who are extremely knowledgeable going through a time where they might be writing a lot of curricula and really filling information, to give them time to get used to using the new technologies, or working in partnerships where you have very technically literate teachers partnering with very experienced teachers. So I think what we might see is this shift of roles that is different from what we're used to in the classroom, where one person does absolutely everything. And as there are different teaching styles and different ways that we use technology as individuals. I think that could also be a factor in terms of age or familiarity with technology.
Thanks. Koen, you also wanted to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add 3 points. First of all, there's many things you can do with technology, and there's 4 different stages as well. First of all, you can use it like tablets instead of pen and paper, in which you use it as a substitution. It's not really giving it a lot of extra value. The other thing is that you are trying to redefine your classroom and your way of teaching. And I think by that, technology allows students to interact with each other globally. And that is really one of those ways to redefine learning and making them global citizens. Also, I've been teaching like people who are aged 60 to 80 how to use internet for 10 years. And it took me like 16 weeks before they were able to send an email. And it took me like 5 minutes in order to make sure that they were able to use internet banking. So it's also about mindset, you know, they see how important it is to use internet banking. And so they didn't really require any teaching about that part. So I think it's about mindset as well. For me, it also took like 10 years before I was able, before I enjoyed learning from the screen instead of a book. And now I prefer learning on a screen. And maybe that is why only 20% who start following or attending a MOOC complete the MOOC. Because that's the number, you know, only 10 to 20% complete the MOOC. Why is that? I don't know why, but maybe Kim. Do you know anything about that part?
Actually, you said 10% is very optimistic as far as I know.
Oh.
I've even heard lower figures, so that's the case. Now, I'm afraid that now we'll be kicked out by our hosts because we still have a couple of minutes. And maybe the last questions that I would like to touch upon, because it's repeated several times in the Q&A in different wordings, and it's actually about psychological advice and support for parents. So how would you advise parents on what should they do, on how should they behave, on what should they rely on in this situation with online education of their kids? I know that some of us are parents, so we we are speaking on both sides. Andrea.
Very quickly, please make sure that your children remain creative and have got access to making things, food, cooking, whatever, because I know there's going to be a huge drive at schools to do the catch-up curriculum and to be very kind of academic, you know, English, math, science based, but we need to make sure that they still feel that creative energy wherever they go.
Thanks. Kim?
So I think we are in an exceptional time frame which we as parents did not grow up with technology, and yet we have children who are really competent using it. But I think it's important for a teacher to inform the parent what's happening, basically, why they are making some decisions, and making parents part of that decision making as well. Yeah.
Kim, your remark will be the final of all.
No. I mean, there's two points. I think when talking to parents, I just did some focus groups with parents recently. One was keeping a structure, which was important. Just a daily routine was important to everyone. Just keeping maintaining a structure. And two, to be frank, there's a difference, as Kim said, like there's one aspect which is schooling at home, which is keeping in contact with the teachers. And then there were parents who said, they're at home, I'll teach them chess, I'll teach them gardening. They're now, you know, they're making their beds, they're doing other types of things that we wouldn't have done. I'm teaching them how to do things and we're doing things together. So I think there were other people who really embraced this time as one that they could help learn or teach their kids things that they weren't learning at school. And for them, that was a really nice environment and nice co-creation for them.
Thank you. Thank you all actually for a very insightful conversation. I think we understand more now about where we are and where we are heading. Now there is a poll on my screen about the session, and I give the floor to Dennis, who is going to round up the session.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very exciting discussion. Personally, I've learned a lot. I think that we all are kind of doomed now to learn online also as adults. Thank you all the panelists. Thank you to our moderator.